Previously, in Tydeus' grimdark epic hero, we looked at the story of Tydeus, as told by the ancient Greek authors Homer, Aeschylus, and various others. Once the protege of Athene, Tydeus was one of the 7 against Thebes. He fought off an ambush of 50 men single-handedly, before succumbing to madness in his death throes and devouring the brains of the Theban champion Melanippus, thus dooming himself to death and infamy. In this part 2, we turn to the Latin literary tradition. The most extended and highly focused depictions of Tydeus are found in the works of Publius Papinius Statius, known to his millions of fans and countless schoolchildren in Anglophone countries today as Statius. Statius's magnum opus is his Thebaid, his 12-book take on the 7 against Thebes story, written and published over the last decade or so of the 1st century AD. So, some context. Statius belongs to the era of Latin literature known as Silver Latin, which means not as good as Golden Latin. Of course, labels like that are pretty meaningless in some degree, but it signals something that's pretty much irrefutable. Statius and his peers were self-consciously writing under the shadow of their forebears, and in particular, Virgil. In Statius, you'll find a style that's conscious of, heavily indebted to, but nothing like the Aeneid. To make some superficial observations, Statius's writing is extreme. Call it mannerist, grimdark, hardcore, whatever. His language is obscure, often irritatingly so, and he takes it to such extremes that it's best taken in small doses. Okay, that's my excuse for having not even managed to make it all the way through the whole thing, even in English, and managing to read only 1 book in Latin. Anyway, Tydeus, of course, lends himself to that kind of treatment. He features in several scenes, most notably his final Bloodfest, and we started with an extract of that. And also for his Dispatch of the Ambush of 50, which, as you might recall, was sketched out as far back as Homer. That scene was just made for Statius, 1 man against 50. That calls for some extreme epic violence. Let's take a look at it. It's quite a long scene, so we'll only look at a short excerpt. But before we do, I refer you to a 2015 paper by Kyle Gervais. See the link in the description. Gervais notes that this passage is densely packed with intertextual references, implicitly linking Tydeus to a range of heroic, anti-heroic, and downright monstrous precursors. At one point in the battle, Statius invokes an epic simile, featuring Briareus. Briareus, aka Agion, is one of the Hekatoncheires, the 100-handed ones. Different authors and traditions will place him among the giants or the titans or as something else. None of which is especially important here. The point is he's a big, scary, transgressive monster with 100 hands. No differently did Briareus, massive with his arms, stand armed against the heavens, shrugging off, here the arrows of Phoebus Apollo, there the fierce snakes of Pallas Athena, there Mars's sharp-tipped spear made from Pelethronian pine, there the thunderbolts transformed by wary Pyrrhecmon. Assailed in vain by all the forces of Olympus, he complains that his hands are idle. No more sluggishly did Tydeus blaze. So, in that vivid simile, Tydeus fighting off his 50 assailants is compared to Briareus fighting off the Olympian gods with so much ease that he doesn't even need to use his 100 hands. Epic similes are a commonplace of the epic tradition, hence the name, but while it's common to liken a warrior to a lion or other beast, comparing one to a divine monster such as Briareus is quite exceptional. And it is surely pertinent that in Statius' simile he depicts Briareus as fighting against the order of the Olympians. Is Tydeus too to be considered in such transgressive terms? Or is it just a really cool simile? Gervais sees something monstrous, something transgressive in Statius's depiction of Tydeus as he defeats his assailants. And of course, that monstrous side becomes more evident in Book 8, when Tydeus commits the ultimate transgression, cannibalism. In his reading, Gervais sees the problematicizing portrayal of Tydeus in Book 2 as emblematic of Statius's wider program. To quote, "It is a corollary to the three interrelated themes in the Thebaid, civil war and attendant breakdown of the identities and the tension between the heroic and monstrous behavior and the failure of traditional Herculean virtus in a perverted poetic universe." Incidentally, Gervais has since written a full-length commentary on Book 2 of the Thebaid. I've not had a chance to check it out, but it's surely a good thing. There's a dearth of commentaries on the Thebaid and hardly any half-decent English translations. It should by now be fairly clear that Tydeus is a particularly problematic hero. Always was, and is especially so in the Thebaid. But perhaps we should not overplay this side of him, even in Statius. In her 2001 paper, Mad About Winning, Epic War and Madness in the Games of Statius' Thebaid, Helen Lovett argues that right until his Tisiphone-inspired fall into cannibalism, Tydeus is one of the sanest of the characters in the Thebaid, albeit that relative sanity compared to the cast of that epic is a very low bar. It's just that his final fall is so extreme that it has inevitably coloured his reception ever since, and even everything that came before it. As Lovett puts it, Tydeus's dying act of cannibalism is one so horrific as to dominate all readings of his former state of mind. His ultimate madness, inspired by the Furies, has been read back into his previous acts, and has become his defining feature. We've probably lost many Greek accounts of Tydeus, and so since late antiquity the figure of Tydeus has been primarily associated with Statius's depictions in the Thebaid. For a long time Statius was derided by critics, or just pushed into obscurity, and it's only been in the last few decades that he's received close and serious attention. But it wasn't always like that. Statius was massive in the Middle Ages. There's demonstrable proof of that. Over 100 manuscripts of Statius have come down to us, preserved through the so-called manuscript tradition, by which I mean the medieval or early modern copies that were made mostly by monks. More than 100 manuscripts, let's just reflect on that. Some, quote, canonical authors have come down to us thanks to the chance survival of a single or very few manuscripts. Catullus famously survives owing to 3 or so manuscripts, which apparently all derive from a single manuscript uncovered under a bushel in the 13th century, which then went AWOL and was only discovered a few decades later. Many authors' works have only partially survived thanks to scraps found in quotations or dug out from rubbish dumps. And I'm not necessarily just talking about the obscure guys either. I mean, highly influential authors like Callimachus barely survive other than through scraps found in rubbish dumps. And of course, so much literature has been lost altogether. Perhaps you're familiar with Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose, which really is all about the loss of the final copy of Aristotle's second book of the Poetics after a mad monk eats it. So, the fact that we have more than 100 manuscripts of Statius really says something about his popularity through the Middle Ages. In part 3 of Tydeus, grimdark epic hero, we'll remain in the Middle Ages, but return to Tydeus, and we'll see how subsequent references and allusions to Tydeus have largely been mediated through Statius's depictions. Until then, like and subscribe, and we'll be back soon.